All right. Okay. So, afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on Beyond Valorisation, Upcycled Food from Technical and Behavioural Approaches. So we are delighted to welcome Jonathan Deutsch, if I pronounce it appropriately.
Well done.
From Drexel University, alongside Simona Grasso from the Food Science and Nutrition section of the school. So our first speaker this morning is going to be Simona. So Simona is an Ad Astra assistant professor in the Food Science and Nutrition section. Her research spans the development and characterization of new foods that are both nutritious and sustainable, covering every step of the product development journey. And prior to joining UCD, Simona was a senior research fellow at the University of Reading, and prior to that, a lecturer at the University of Lincoln. And she did her PhD here in UCD, but has also worked as a food technologist and new product developer at various food companies as well. So we're going to take questions at the end of the two speakers, but Simona, if you want to take it away.
Perfect, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you see the screen? Perfect. Okay, so today I will cover a little bit of an introduction on upcycled foods. I'll give you some examples, and then I'll go over several challenges that are related with upcycled foods, and then I'll just cover some of the current research that I'm doing. So first of all, I want to talk about the issue. So we know that alarmingly, almost 40% of the food that is produced in the world goes uneaten. And this is higher than the third reported by FAO, and is a more recent statistic. So I think this is from WWF and Tesco as well. At the same time, we have targets to meet. So both, the global from the, sustainable development goals, which are also translated in Ireland. And this is about try to reduce our food waste by 50% by 2030. So how are we going to achieve this? We need to do something about it. So it is important that we try to move from an economy that is linear, so an economy where we take and we make and then we dispose, to an economy that is circular, where we make, we use, but then we recycle. So we try to put things back into the loop as much as possible. And if you look here at this wasted food scale by the EPA in the US, this shows how we can reduce the environmental impact of wasted food. So the dark green option is the most preferred option. And then if you go down the bottom, you go to the other side on the orange and red side that is about avoiding. So as you can see, the most preferred option should be obviously about preventing food waste in the first place. After that, it's about donating food as much as possible and then upcycling it. And then after that, below in the wasted food scales, there is feeding animals, there is composting, there is anaerobic digestion, and then the least preferred option is sending to landfill. So you can see where upcycling stands, and it's quite high in the scale. So I just wanted to show some statistics on the Irish food waste and where it comes from. So these are some stats from 2022 from the EPA, and you can see how manufacturing and processing is actually the highest contributor at 31%, and then followed by households at 29%. Usually, I think around Europe in general, is household that is actually the biggest contributor. So when we talk here about manufacturing, processing, these are some are unusable and unedible byproducts, but some are byproducts, and this is what we were talking about. So in terms of definition, this is the official definition that has been put together by the Upcycled Food Association. And as you can see, it talks about ingredients that otherwise would have not have gone to human consumption. It talks about verifiable supply chains and a specific positive impact on the environment. Now, as you can see, this is quite general, so it's not overly clear what it includes. There is a certification standards where you can see that you can use a minimum of 10% to make your product upcycled. And it includes two broad categories. So it includes both imperfect fruit and vegetables, so imperfect produce, but also food industry byproducts. So there I have the example of the skins of oranges after the juice has been removed. There is also a more academic definition from a few years previously, and this definition is specific on byproduct. There are specific examples, so you can see how this refers to byproducts that are created from the manufacturing of other products, and these are turned into something new. So there is the example of the byproduct that is the spent grain that is turned into a new food, which is granola. And then there is another example of the carrot peels as an ingredient that is then used to make, for example, a powdered soup mix. So as I said, this is a bit more specific. It's more about only the byproducts. It's not about the imperfect produce. And it's more of an academic definition. So in terms of what is the difference then in terms of trying to do something with both of these? If we talk about imperfect produce, once we try to process that into a food product, then most likely that food will be actually identical to regular foods. So let's say if you take an overripe tomato and you turn that into ketchup, basically you will still have the same looks, the same flavors, the same texture, and so on. The same thing with imperfect apples. Once you make juice, nobody's going to really notice any difference because it's mainly about cosmetic standards. However, if you do use a food industry byproduct, this comes from an ingredient that has already been processed. So if you think about your apple pomace after you make apples, or if you think about brewer spent grains after you make beer, once you add those into a food, then they most likely will have a particular color, a particular taste, flavor, or texture that will be imparted onto the new food. The other important thing to mention is that these food industry byproducts can be used both whole or fractionated. So the best way forward would be to use them whole, because in that way, you're not doing any more processing, so you're not putting in any more energy or anything else really. It is easier from a consumer perspective because it's not further processed, and it will be easier also from a legislation perspective, a regulatory perspective, because as soon as you fractionate things into fiber or protein and you concentrate those elements, you can get into regulatory issues. I will give you now some examples. So these are some kind of interesting companies. There is Phenolives. They're doing a flour with the olive stones, okay, which is usually not really used. It's a nutritious flour that can be used different applications. And they are based in Israel. A-Grain is based in Denmark. They do an upcycled brewer spent grain flour that can be used again in different baked food applications. Renut is an interesting new company. They're based in Switzerland, and they have this patented process that allows them to basically process the nuts with their shells on, so there is no waste produced at all, and it's quite an interesting process. The US is really the first country where the upcycle movement has started, and therefore they have the widest range of food products. So here you can see there is Renewal Mill producing an Okara flour, and this Okara flour is basically a flour made from the leftover after you make soy milk. At the bottom there is Wayward Spirits, and that is alcohol that is produced by the fermentation of whey, the leftover from the dairy industry, either yogurt or cheese. Then there is an upcycled bread made with brewer spent grains. There is another drink made with whey protein by Arla. There are pulp chips. So these are made from the pulp leftover after juice production is turned into chips. And there is also a growing category, which is the pet food. And actually, this is different from, if you remember the scale that we looked at earlier, we saw that feeding animal was down the the priority scale. But actually, if we consider this as a pet food, then it will have a higher value, and this will be anyhow purchased. It will be purchased by humans for their pets. So it is considered upcycling. Spare Burger is another interesting new product, and this is a hybrid burger where 70% is made of beef and the remaining 30% is made with the surplus vegetables. So it's a mix of hybrid meat product with kind of more sustainable ingredients. In the UK, I'll just give a few examples. So there is a toast, there is a beer. It is made by replacing part of the grains, so it could be either barley or wheat, with leftover breads from bakeries. So it's before it reaches consumers, is whatever is left over at the end of the day in the bakeries. So the yeast basically needs sugar to ferment, so it can basically, some of the sugar can come from this bread. Okay, so I think about a third of it can be substituted. So instead of using fresh new barley or fresh new wheat, we use leftover bread. Then there is Nibs at Sea. This is a company I've helped in developing some of their products. So in this case, this is a granola, and they make it by mixing fresh apple pulp with the grains, and then by baking it, and it actually helps also in terms of sweetness. In Ireland, there is one main big company, as far as I know, and they produce a brewer spent grain flour. So you can buy either the grains on their own or the flour on its own, or you can use you can buy the mixes. So they have some baking mixes, but they also recently have developed some snacks, some bites. All of these products show you that there is an upcycled food market, and in 2024 this was valued at 59 billion US dollars, and this market is forecasted to grow by 2034. In Europe, we are still, the market is still in its infancy, but it is also anticipated to be growing. Germany, France, and UK are considered to be the first key supporters. I will now cover the challenges. There is a series of challenges related with upcycled food. One of them is the scaling up. So there are a lot of companies out there that are starting up, but they're working at a very artisanal level and very kitchen scale level. So these companies need the investment and they need the technologies to scale up. This obviously has an impact on costs because if an upcycled ingredient is more expensive than a regular ingredient, then unfortunately food manufacturers will not switch. So we have to make the production cost competitive so that upcycled ingredients can be used in more food products. The prices at the minute that reach consumers are quite high. So right now, upcycled foods here in Europe are mainly a niche product. So they are quite expensive. They are purchased by people who are environmentally friendly. We should try to make this more affordable, more accessible, because ultimately upcycled food could contribute to food security. So bring it to everyone. The second challenge is about sustainability. So obviously, sustainability is one of the main selling point of upcycled foods, but we have to be careful as to whether these foods are really more sustainable and whether they're really better for the environment. So obviously, a life cycle assessment should be backing up claims. There is a risk of greenwashing because we know that the upcycled food certification standard obviously can guarantee that they put their logo on a product and therefore they know that it has been produced in a certain way. But a lot of products in the market don't have it and they still say upcycled on the label. So what does that mean? And the entry, the barrier is very low. As we mentioned before, it's only 10% to get the upcycled food certification standard. But if we consider, let's say, an organic food, when you buy an organic food, 95% of that food has to be organic. So is that 10% enough, let's say, from a sustainability perspective, but also from a consumer perspective? A consumer is my third challenge. So we know that the term upcycle has been now recognized as the most widely used to refer to these type of products. But in other languages, in Italian, in French, in German, there is not really such exact translation, so it's kind of hard to even convey the message. And then the same problem is that upcycled food, are they understood? Do people understand what they are? Would they be trusted? Would they be valued? Would people pay for them? And then regarding the messaging, should we push for a sustainability message or for a nutrition message or for both? And is there still disgust associated with this type of ingredients? My research has shown that any type of information is beneficial. So if you provide sustainability information or nutritional information, people will be more inclined. And actually, I haven't been able to report any disgust. People were quite open to trying upcycled foods. Another challenge is about nutrition. So we know that the byproducts themselves as ingredients are very nutritious, but we know that they have been processed previously and that they will be processed after. So all of this processing, it does affect the nutritional quality, okay? So as we mentioned, some upcycled food might contain only a small amount of byproducts. So that doesn't mean that the upcycled food is necessarily healthier. Okay, so it might contain a little bit of, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has been formulated to be healthier. So I personally think that upcycled food should should be pushing more on their nutritional credential. And one of the most important one, for example, is the fiber gap. So I think we're supposed to be eating 24 to 35 grams of fiber per day. And I think about 80% of people in Ireland don't meet this. So these byproducts could be a really good help. Another challenge is supply chains. So we need to develop and find local supply chains around upcycled food. There's no point in shipping these things from one side of the world to another, because obviously that will affect their sustainability credential. So let's say if I am working for an apple industry, I'm producing an apple-based product. I produce this apple byproduct. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to transform it myself and make business into a completely different area, like a muffin or something else? Or am I going to give this byproduct, I'm going to sell it to another company, another startup who is going to make a business out of it? And then how is this relationship going to work? Is the seasonality going to affect it? Because a lot of products are only produced seasonally. Another challenge that I mentioned earlier is legislation. So the US is a little bit more liberal than the EU, and that has resulted in more products, as we have seen. In the EU, we have something called the Novel Food Regulation, and this means that if a product has not been in the market before 1996, then it has to go through a series of paperwork and to show basically that that product is safe. So if we take here the example of pea versus sunflower, pea was already in the market before this regulation came up, and therefore a protein concentrate from pea does not have to go through this regulation. But if we consider a protein isolate from sunflower seeds, it has to go through this novel food regulation, even if they're pretty much very similar products and they're made in very similar ways. So we should be making it a little bit easier for companies to get into these markets and to be able to commercialize their products, because otherwise the regulatory burden is just too much. It's too expensive and it's too long. And finally, the challenge 7 is on safety. So what we're doing when we remove, let's say, juice from apple and we end up with apple pomace, or when we make beer and we end up with these grains after we take away really the sugar. Sometimes we're concentrating things down. So you can see there for the apples, you can see a lot of skins. So this could be an issue in terms of pesticides, because we are removing all the water, we are concentrating down all the pesticides. If we think about the outer skins or the outer layers of grains, these grains are wet because during processing they're immersed in water. Therefore, you end up with these wet byproducts, and this could lead to mycotoxin issues. So again, safety is something we need to be aware of, and we need to be able to monitor. And this is something to think about as well. And I just want to finish talking about my current research. And this is because we did a review recently, and this highlighted an important gap. So we saw that in academia, upcycled food development is really researcher-led. So let's say I'm a researcher, I'm in the lab, and I'm working on grape skins. And after I develop these fantastic ingredients, I decide that I want to add it in pasta. And believe it or not, this is a real example. But this combination might not necessarily work from a consumer perspective. Okay, so it might be doable from a technical perspective, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will appreciate purple pasta. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to change this using a consumer-led approach. So we're going to ask consumers, what is it that you would like to be seen, used in terms of ingredients, and which application do you think will be best? So in this way, we come up with combinations that are more likely to succeed in the market. So I've run through an introduction, some examples, the challenges, and my current research. This is the end of my presentation. I'll just pass you on to John for the rest of his.
Great, thank you, Simona. And I'm going to share mine. We'll take questions for both of us at the end. And I have a large presentation that I'm going to skip around quite a bit to illustrate, I think, two things that are nice follow-ons from Simona's presentation. One is case studies of upcycled food that we developed with that sort of consumer acceptance approach and consumer co-creation, and which is really the basis of design methodology and good food product design. And then also some bits about challenge 3, which is the consumer acceptance challenge. And it's great. Thank you all for joining. It's great to see some familiar names in the participant list. Feel free to put questions in the chat too. I won't read it as I talk, but we'll hopefully go right into conversation, and I will do my best to stay on time for about 17 minutes before the hour. So just a bit about us. Drexel University is a private nonprofit research university in Philadelphia. It's a sort of a polytechnic, and it was, I won't get too into the history, but it was founded in 1891 with a number of other sort of very technically oriented schools like Carnegie Mellon and Stetson and others by industrialists who found that the university system in the US was wonderful for arts and sciences, but they really needed folks like food technologists. And so we grew up across the river from Campbell's Soup and not too far from Hershey Foods. And so food has been part of our university from the beginning. And it's very unusual at a doctoral granting research university in the US, as is true in the EU, to have a culinary program. So I was recruited really to answer this question of what does culinary research look like? And my position is I'm a professor of food and hospitality management, but really have a research chef, culinary science background. So we started this thing called the Drexel Food Lab, which does good food product design and culinary innovation. And we offer undergraduate and graduate courses and certificates that are available. The certificates are available to students across the university. So what's exciting is we have students studying medicine, public health, nutrition, entrepreneurship, math, finance, who all have a passion for this field. And we work with real world clients. So we're trying to really break down that divide that Simona pointed out between academic product development, which is really what is possible, and commercial product development, which is what do people want and want to see in the market. And we hopefully work at that intersection. And we always emphasize that our real product, while we do food product development, what we're really developing are students to go out in the world and be successful in industry or nonprofit, government, and so on. I'm going to skip some food waste background because Simona did a great job. But what I will say is a bit of our origin story. So we started Philadelphia as a city of great wealth disparity. So we have some rich anchor institutions like universities, hospitals, the train station headquarters, Aramark headquarters in our neighborhood, but also very high rates of food insecurity and poverty. And so our introduction to upcycling was really in the kitchen, being asked to come up with solutions for distributing surplus food from supermarkets in the neighborhood to people in need. And what we found initially was that while the system was very efficient at taking pounds of surplus food, for example, from a supermarket and getting them to a shelter or a soup kitchen, they were not so good at converting that into usable meals. So things were just sort of moving around the system. And one of our first innovations was something that is as low tech as possible. What we found was that bananas that were overripe were being composted at the supermarket level. Then the improvement to that system was they were being donated, and that's really wonderful, but they weren't being eaten. So it was just shifting the food waste around the city in not a meaningful way. And our students came into this scenario and they said, well, what if we just make something very simple? Just freeze the bananas, puree them, and make a sort of banana ice cream, which is one easy way to address that fiber gap. And there's also, we have a fruit and vegetable gap, especially with people experiencing food insecurity, where almost every American doesn't get enough fruit or vegetables in their diet, but particularly those experiencing food insecurity. So we found this simple culinary innovation was very successful, and that got us thinking about other ways we could work to upcycle food, which at the time was not even called Upcycled. So one of our first commercial products was with a company called Baldor. They make fresh cut vegetables, things like baby carrots and diced onions and things like that for food service and for retail. And they took all of their powders and made a vegetable powder that they called Sparks, which is scraps spelled backwards. That's how they branded it. And this really evolved into thinking commercially at what we could do. What's the life cycle analysis? What's the overall impact? So we have a number of examples that I can show you. One of our first examples, this is before we even, the product on the left is called Rescued Relish. It's a mixed vegetable relish, and this is an attempt to really outsmart the food system. So if you have a food technology background, you know that the one thing that is sacred in your food processing that can't be touched is your formula. And so, but that's really ungainly for a food system sensitive approach where we might have surplus cauliflower this week and surplus cabbage next week. But if the formula says that your soup is only 11% cauliflower, you can't increase it to accommodate the market. So this used a rapid labeling system, and it also used this idea of a premium product that I think is very important, because one of the challenges that I don't think Simona addressed that is true for many consumers is they feel that upcycled food is should be discounted in some way, or that it's for people who can't afford conventional food, don't have the means for conventional food. And we wanted to make upcycled food premium. So we worked with sort of our hipster pickle maker called Bryan Street, and this evolved into a brand called Abundantly Good, and the tagline here is upcycle and uplift. So we could see this progressing really beautifully in the field. One of our favorite cases is a product that Sheetal Bayirat, who's on the right on your screen, developed as a master's thesis. And this is very parallel to the novel foods legislation in the EU. In the US, foods that are traditionally eaten are considered grass by the FDA, generally regarded as safe. And so avocados, for example, have been eaten for millennia, and they're considered grass. However, avocado pits, the seeds, are very antioxidant rich and were not in the codex of grass foods or approved foods. And so we're really proud of these students for going through the actual process to self-affirm that avocado seeds could be used as an upcycled product and launch this beverage coming out of a thesis. So just a number of products that we've developed, again, taking that consumer-oriented approach. If any of you are gardeners or farmers, you know, you leave so many leaves in the field, the outer leaves of things like romaine lettuce or cabbage or cauliflower. So this is making chips with those. This won an award from the Specialty Food Association, which runs the Fancy Food Show in New York and Las Vegas. This is another upcycled vegetable broth using fresh cut scraps. And it's really designed for food service to replace those salty, powdery bouillon type broths that really don't add a lot of nutritional value and add a lot of sodium. So this is a real vegetable concentrate. And the concentrate is important too, because we didn't want to be shipping water around the country. This is some industrial work we did with broccoli stems. So this is a company that does fresh cut produce, and they have about 1 truck load, which is about, I don't know, 18,000 kilos of broccoli stems each week that are left after they sell the florets to their customers. And so things like broccoli mac and cheese for food service, for schools that has a full serving of vegetables is an example of something that came out of that work. So this has really evolved into a very robust field. There's over 500 upcycled certified products. And what started with there were 9 of us when we started the original Upcycled Food Association and Foundation, all startups. And now what's great is we're seeing large food companies as well, like Mondelez and Dole and others, and have a series of researchers, including Simona and me, who have been very committed to doing research in this field. So I just want to take you through some of this consumer research, and it's really gratifying to see that some of our work is being cited in a presentation like Dr. Grasso's. So one of our very first studies, which she cited, the Bott et al. Study, is and Siddharth Bott was a Ph.D. student here at Drexel, was even what to call this stuff, and we found that in English and in the US, this was just US consumers with English speakers, that upcycled food was the preferred term. Prior to that, we were hearing foods like, well, of course, the industry still calls it valorized, which is not a very consumer-friendly term. And then consumer-friendly attempts were things like salvaged, rescued, reprocessed, reclaimed, recycled, upscaled, and upcycled was the clear winner. This is all published research, so I'm going to breeze through it, but I'm happy to send citations or PDFs for anything. We also did some work on how consumers perceive upcycled food. So when I started in this field in the 90s, the 1990s, last millennium, the conventional wisdom was really that upcycled food would be considered scandalous by consumers. And there were some scandals. There was one in the US called pink slime, where they were using vacuum extraction to take little bits of meat off the bones and work it back into ground meat, ground beef, minced beef, which is a very sustainable practice that we would always probably all be enthusiastic about if we read it in a journal article. But they snuck a camera inside this factory and they showed the bones and the meat and the stuff coming out of the extruder and everything. And it looked very unappealing and unappetizing. And people were boycotting school lunch and calling their Congress people, and it turned into a big thing. And so that's really where the industry was. They were thinking, let's not show anything about how we work with our byproducts or co-streams, because either, as Simona pointed out earlier, people will think that this is disgusting in some way, or even if they accept it, they might want a discount and think, well, if you were going to throw this out anyway, why should I pay for it? What we found is that people do consider upcycled food as its own distinct category, and we called this a very deliberately dry term, VASP, value added surplus product, because we knew that upcycled was an appealing term to consumers, and we didn't want to sway them. So what we found is that consumers do consider VASP foods, upcycled foods, to be distinct from conventional or organic foods, but between the two, more aligned with organic or natural foods, which is obviously very promising for marketers. Some other work we did, one of my students named Olivia Spratt did her senior thesis on defining upcycled foods, which then became the was edited, adapted for the UFA definition. We talked about that a little bit. This is pretty outdated, but awareness of upcycled food is very low still. However, there's a lot of willingness and interest in trying it. And I think that's true, although the numbers have certainly improved. One of our important initial studies was on this question of discounting, disgust, willingness to pay. And that's really top of mind for marketers. So they ask a lot, well, this is all nice and good, but will consumers pay more for upcycled food? And the answer is left to no other factors. If I said to you, do you want a cookie or an upcycled cookie? You would say, I'll take the cookie, please. And if I say, how much would you pay for each of these? You would pay slightly more, although not significantly more in most cases, for the conventional food. However, what we find, and this also goes back to Simona's point, is that with a little bit of messaging, you can encourage folks to pay more for upcycled food. And we tried two different types of messaging. One was emotional messaging. There's starvation, there's all these problems, look at these poor kids, and by choosing an upcycled food, you'll be reducing food waste and alleviating hunger. And then rational messaging was very matter of fact. Here's the problem with climate. Here's what upcycled foods offer. And to our surprise, the rational messaging worked really well. I don't have this in this presentation, but I also can address that nutrition versus sustainability question. And it won't surprise most people to know. So in marketing, there's a construct called self versus other. So is the benefit of sustainability is other facing. If I choose this product, I can reduce food waste, reduce greenhouse gases, help the environment. that may make me feel good, but mostly that's a benefit to other people. Whereas nutrition is a self-benefit. If I choose this product, it will make me healthier, it will give me fiber, it will give me pleasure and taste. And unfortunately for society, but probably not surprisingly, the self-benefit almost always wins. People are very selfish. And the analogy I always give is for a cool electric car, probably the most sustainable thing you could do is drive your 10 or 15 or 20-year-old car until it stops running, rather than buy a new electric vehicle, high-end, sexy new car. But people do that because it's fun and it's a status symbol and so on, not because they're trying to reduce emissions necessarily. So finally, we did some work that led to the Upcycled certification logo. We tested, again, this kind of consumer-driven approach, not just saying to the graphic designer, give us a logo, but saying, here are elements that we have scientifically tested that may shape what people want to see. And so we shaped various shapes. We tested various shapes, colors, fonts, and symbols with over 1,600 participants. And what we found, almost every upcycled logo that existed was some sort of arrow motif indicating up. And what we found, and colors, green did very well. What we found was that people really did not like the arrow and were more interested in this kind of leaf motif. And so I'm going to go back to, we also tested fonts. And if you look at the finished logo, you see this leaf motif, you see the color that tested well, that up is indicated with the word and not with the arrow. And so that all led to that development. And I'm going to just conclude with saying how proud I am of all of us in this movement. So this is the original EPA food recovery hierarchy from the early 2000s that many of us are familiar with. It says basically what to do with surplus food: reduce it, feed people, feed animals, make energy, compost, and landfill in that order. Landfill is the last resort. And you'll see conspicuously absent from this construct is the word upcycle. It was not part of our thinking or our vocabulary even 20 years ago. And now, if I get hit by a bus today, I'll feel like I've accomplished something in my career because I see upcycle is now in the preferred area of the food, the October 2023 wasted food scale. So I'm really proud of that. So I'm going to stop there. Feel free to follow us. All our socials and everything are here, my email. And thank you. It's time for questions. Or if not, questions to end early.
Maybe I'll start with a question then. So it seems like consumer education is really central to the success of kind of expanding the amount of upcycled foods. Is there much of a difference, do you think, in consumer understanding or awareness in the EU versus the US? Do you think the US is, like you said, kind of had more progress in this area?
I don't know. Maybe Simona should start with that one, and we can sort of compare. I have, of course, been to the EU, but I've not spent a lot of time doing consumer research in the EU.
Yeah, Martina, so sorry, you were asking if there is a difference in consumer perception in the different countries?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've done work in the UK, and then I've done a study comparing US versus China, and I obviously use these two countries because the US is the one that's been, let's say, exposed to this concept for longer, while China is a little bit more, traditionalist, but also they are very good at using, all the parts of a carcass and all of that. But actually, they all preferred slightly different things overall. So you need to really tailor the upcycled ingredients and the new upcycled foods to the correct country and also to the correct demographic. And there's not like one size fits all. You really have to tailor it.
Thanks, Simona. That makes sense. Everybody's got different preferences.
Mm.
And then Emma has first of all, she thanks for you for very thought-provoking talks. And she was wondering if consumers are willing to pay more now versus back a few years ago. So is it kind of trendier now? Do you see that change in time, even in the last, 3 or 4 years, that people are willing to pay more?
Yeah, there is increased awareness and willingness to pay. It's a little bit confounded by COVID and rising food prices. So we're paying more for food everywhere. Those supposed supply chain related increases that many of us experienced over the last few years didn't come back down post pandemic lockdowns. So it's a little bit hard to show that, but I would say overall, yes, there's a lot more interest and willingness to pay. Brands are also getting a lot savvier about how they're communicating this, and the certification also helps. So we find with the upcycled food certification, people are willing to pay more.
And then actually just on the nutrition point of view and how obviously people like to eat things that they perceive will be more nutritious. Is there any good examples of, like, obviously processing often improves the bioavailability of lots of different nutrients? Is there any good examples of kind of upcycled foods that really do have a much better nutritional profile due to some kind of previous pre-processing, or how
Yeah, my favorite example for this is we've seen such a giant boom in plant-based milks. And of course, plant-based milks are not milks, right? Almonds don't have nipples. They're juices. So we're basically pureeing, grains, nuts, peas, whatever it is, and we're juicing them, right? And if you ask any nutritionist, the first thing they say is, don't drink juice. Eat real fruit, right? If you drink a glass of orange juice, you're drinking the sugar of 5 oranges with none of the fiber and none of the other nutrients that we need, right? And you probably wouldn't sit down and eat 5 oranges because you're not that hungry, right? So it's a good weight control strategy. The same really should be true for plant-based milks. If we're drinking almond milk or oat milk, what we're really drinking is the starch and sugar of the grain and in water, and left in the press is the fiber and the protein. Most people want more protein. They probably don't need it. And most people need more fiber. And we're leaving that in the machine, right? So one of the critiques that I heard quite a lot, I got into a Twitter fight with a journalist when we first started this field, or started in this field, is that, well, upcycled food is just making more ultra processed foods that no one needs in the first place. And my counter to that would be, while that's true, in many cases, people are going to eat what they're going to eat. So we might as well have a more efficient system, first of all, and we might as well keep these nutrients in the food supply and out of the trash bin to whatever extent we can, right? So Simona probably has a better answer for that, but I was excited to talk about it.
No, I mean, what I've read is that obviously it's, you need to process these ingredients to make them stable. So I don't know if I mentioned drying of these wet ingredients. So if you have your apple pomace, it will be all wet, so you'll have to dry it to be able to store it. And the same thing with your brewer spent grains. So obviously the way you you dry these products has an effect and an impact on its nutritional quality. So the higher the temperature, the longer the time, the more you will destroy all of the heat sensitive compounds and all of the vitamins and antioxidants and all of that. In the brewer spent grains, for example, there is a lot of proteins, but also that protein has a little bit been damaged in a way during the brewing process. So it's not intact protein in a way. It is protein that has, been processed and has already been exposed to water and then dried and all of that. So definitely there's a lot of work needed on the impact of processing and then digestion and all of that, because it's not it's not known.
Yes, it is a real actually opportunity there to do some nutritional intervention studies with
Yeah.
some of these upcycled foods. And there's that tension between the ultra processed versus, kind of upcycling and the good connotations with that.
Yeah.
And then Emma just had actually another question in terms of how important is taste with these products from upcycled ingredients. So is it even more important that they taste great, or are people willing to compromise on taste a bit here for greater environmental effects?
I think it's the opposite of compromise. I think people are holding upcycled foods to a higher standard because they're novel. And I think if you look at research on novel foods and new acceptance of new foods, people are extra picky if something's unfamiliar, and they gets more scrutiny than something that's familiar. So you might, if you have an apple that's mediocre, you might say, all right, well, I've had a million apples, it's fine. But if this is a fruit you never saw before and you taste it, you might reject it because it's totally foreign to you. And we're seeing some similar things around people's standards for the quality of upcycled foods and also the safety. So I think we're in a very precarious situation in upcycled foods as a movement, in that in other commodities, for example, fresh produce, hopefully it's better in Ireland, but in the US, every few months you get some recall. Don't eat romaine lettuce from these, Chipotle or these restaurants. There's salmonella from the groundwater or E. coli or some problem. And there's been a recall, and we follow that advice, and then a month later we're back to eating what we have always eaten, and we quickly forget about these problems. I feel like with upcycled food, it's just going to take one problem for people to say, well, now I knew this was a bad idea. Like, I got sick, there was a recall. This is not good. And because this is still a relatively unfamiliar category, I think people will be much less tolerant for inadequacies in upcycled foods versus conventional foods.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add on to that, I think it has been shown in the past that consumers in general are not willing to compromise taste for anything, not even for health. So they want, which makes sense. I mean, you eat food for enjoyment, for pleasure. So even if it's better for you or bad for the environment, taste is still very important. I think the issues with these byproducts is that we have to move away from trying to make them look exactly like the conventional products. So if you do add a byproduct from brewer spent grain into a pasta or into a muffin, it is going to have an effect. Okay, so it's just about saying, okay, it does look different, it does have a different texture. That doesn't mean that is worse, it's just different. Okay, so it's the same thing for all of the foods in the supermarket that have added fiber, or they look a little bit darker. So they might not suit everybody. If you're looking for the typical white looking breads, it might not suit everybody. But I don't think it should be about developing foods that look exactly like conventional foods, because you are putting something different, and you might want people to see that and to notice that. A lot of these byproducts are dark, or they are green, or they are, so they are going to impart a color. But you just have to justify that and make sure that it still tastes okay. So it's more about the reformulation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And then actually, so we're just coming up to 5 to 2 now, but maybe we could end on both of you if you mention like maybe what the next biggest barrier is, or what that's kind of really exciting about you think are the next steps in this area. And it might be very different maybe in the US versus the EU in terms of what those things are.
And do you want to start, Simona?
Yeah, I think all of those challenges I mentioned, they're all, I think, equally important. There's a lot of things that still need to be done, from the scaling up to lowering the costs and the prices to consumers, because ultimately we want to make these products accessible and we want to have as many people as possible eating them. But I guess for me, it's the regulation and the safety side of things, because I think the EU has to do more to make sure that these products are supported, and at the same time that they are safe for people, and that they are regulated to make sure that if there is something on the label, that people understand what that is and people trust those products.
Yeah, I would add in addition to the consumer awareness and acceptance work, I think everyone is waiting for the big food industry to make some moves. So we've still been a very startup culture. If you look at most of the products, they're small brands. They're not owned by Unilever or Nestle. I think you'll see, if I had to predict in the next few years, once you see a major multinational like General Mills or Unilever, a company like that, come out with an upcycled breakfast cereal or an upcycled bread, I think that is what essentially ends in a positive way the upcycled food movement, right? Because it doesn't need to be a consumer education, a social movement. It becomes normalized and it just becomes good food manufacturing practice not to waste so much food. And I think that's the maturity of the movement. And I hope to see that in the next few years.
Okay, that's great. Thank you both very much for that really interesting talk on this topic. I think we're all really excited to see this develop and excited to see it expand in Ireland anyway.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Thanks so
Martina,
much
for
for having
inviting
us.
us.
Thank you.
And also thank you, Dr. Feeney, for the great questions, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.